Welcome to tonight's Renewable Energy and Sustainable Living presentation brought to you by MAREA, the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Association. MAREA is a 501c3 nonprofit grassroots organization made up of volunteers dedicated to educating and engaging the public and advocating for renewable energy production, energy efficiency, and sustainable living. We encourage you to listen, ask questions, experiment with what you learn, and help others become more sustainable. I'm Phil Jones, tonight's host. This is our second meeting for this year. We will be back the last Tuesday of each month through October to continue our presentations on renewable energy and sustainable living. We post presentations and registration links on our website, themarea.org, where you can also add yourself to our mailing list to receive our email reminders. Join us Tuesday, March 25th, the last Tuesday of next month, to learn the means and challenges of recycling waste and improving sustainability and circularity at Villanova University from the head of their program. But tonight, we are presenting Weaving More Sustainable Fabrics into Fashion. During the presentation, please mute your microphones. You can enter questions into the chat box. At the end of the presentation, we will ask your chat questions to the presenter. Tonight's presentation will be recorded. And now I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speakers, Leslie Davidson and Rachel Higgins. Leslie Davidson is a fashion design graduate from the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, initially entering the industry with a primary focus on design. However, upon experiencing the realities of the field, her dedication to sustainability and deep concern for the fashion industry's negative environmental impact prompted a transformative shift toward a career aimed at catalyzing systematic change. Since 2017, she has transformed her passion by centering her work around advocating for eco-friendly practices and circular economies spanning agriculture, fiber, and fashion. Her commitment extends to serving on the PA Sustainable Business Network Steering Committee, actively advocating for sustainable manufacturing in Pennsylvania. As the co-founder of Pennsylvania Fibershed and the executive director of All Together Now PA, Leslie envisions a future where the fashion and textile industry seamlessly integrate with nature, promoting the circular economy, economic principles, and empowering local communities. Rachel Higgins is a passionate advocate for circular fashion and brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the sustainable fashion movement. She has a Bachelor of Science in Fashion Design and Merchandising from Drexel University and a Master's degree of Professional Studies in Business of Fashion from LIM. Rachel's journey began with the creation and successful sale of her children's clothing brand. Her dedication to fashion education led her to a teaching position in the design and manufacturing program at Drexel, where she imparts her insights and passions to the next generation of fashion professionals. She leads the sustainability committee for the Philadelphia Fashion and Garments Task Force, contributing to sustainability initiatives in the local fashion industry. As a co-founder of PA Fibershed, she is instrumental in advancing sustainable and circular fashion practices. Welcome, Leslie and Rachel. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Phil. And thanks for everybody for being here. We really appreciate the invitation and are excited to see so many people on the call. This is awesome. Should I share my screen now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Can everybody see this? Okay. Welcome. I don't know if you mentioned keeping the comments in the chat, but you guys can ask questions in the chat and then we'll get to them at the end. And you can unmute yourselves at the end if you want to ask. So I'm Leslie, and I don't know, Rachel, if you want to say hi.
Rachel. Hi.
Yes. We're the co-founders of Pennsylvania Fibershed. All right, I have to figure out how I'm going to do this here. Okay. This is the wrong slide. Okay, what is a fibershed? A fibershed is a strategic geography that defines a natural textile resource base. So if you think about it like a watershed, we are really creating a regional supply system of for textiles, and it's in relation to, our climate and water and what grows well in our climate, as well as what is needed within our region. So there are different policies, in different states, and the needs are different in every region. So we really want to focus strategically in Pennsylvania and a 50-mile radius around Pennsylvania. Our mission specifically is to connect the fiber and fashion communities in Pennsylvania to build a more sustainable and circular future for textiles and our environment through educational programming and industry development. Educational programming are things like what we're doing tonight, talks and other events, and industry development as we see ourselves as the connectors of the supply chain, really identifying the gaps of what currently exists and then finding ways to connect the dots and fill those gaps. So we like to think of a fiber shed as a soil to soil system. So really thinking about and remembering that our clothing comes from a farm, and that we want to create a system that brings a create a system where we give back to the environment instead of taking it away, and gives opportunities to farmers and everyone along the supply chain, and everyone is created equal. Right now there's a system where it's basically the farmers are at the bottom of the food chain and brands are at the top, and the CEOs at the top make a lot of money. The farmers are not even able to make a living wage. So for us, it's really important that this wealth is distributed around the supply chain, and that whatever we're making is going back into the soil and helping the soil instead of taking away from it. So a lot of people don't really consider what it takes to make one garment. If you think about it, and all of the hands that touch our clothes before we even get our clothes or before it gets to the store, you'll understand why it's so crazy for a shirt to cost $5, right? Because if you look at this chart, design happens. This is for garments and fabric conceptualization. At the same time, the fiber development and textile development has to happen at the same time. So you have to design the garment, you need to source the things that you're going to use for the garment, and you need to plan it. And there's like so many people, and all of these people touch your clothes before they get to you. And not only that, right now, all of these things could be happening in a different country. So you could have your fiber grown in one country and then sent to another country to get it spun and woven, and then another country to get it dyed or printed or cut and sewn. So just thinking about those connections of how much carbon emissions are happening just before it even becomes a shirt is, you can see how that could affect our environment.
Sorry, Leslie, I wanted to just add one more thing to this. This is just like kind of a linear look at what happens here, but there's also several iterations throughout these processes. So you could have well, there are several people working on each of these processes, but you could have samples being made. The pattern maker then has to send them back and fix it again. The dyer has to get the color rate, and then it goes back, and then you fix it again and goes back and forth. So this is just an overall example of the process, but it actually is much more complex, and there's even more people than you could possibly imagine that are involved in this process, because we still do things by hand a lot in this industry.
So I want you to just look down at your clothes right now and consider, what story do our clothes carry? Where do they come from? What are they made of? Do you know who produced them? Do you know where they traveled from? Where are they going to end up? What are you going to do with them when you don't want them anymore? And what stories or relationships do they hold? That's a lot of what we consider and what we are really passionate about at Fibershed is telling those stories and making sure that those stories are the basis of what these products are and the importance of the meaning that they hold. And we want people to consider that when they're purchasing a garment or considering a purchase, because the as you saw on the past slide, there's so many people that this affects. It's not just like us and saying, oh, okay, like I bought this thing, I like it for this one time, and then I'm going to throw it out. No, it's like it really affects a lot of people's lives and not just ours. So it's, I'd love for everybody to consider that every time they put on an outfit or think about buying something of, I have a lot of clothes from my great grandmother and my great grandmother and my grandmother. And I love to wear them and it makes me feel closer to them, but also consider how many stories that come out of that and what they used to do in these clothes. And it just makes me feel really special and close to them. So our purpose at PA Fibershed is that we exist to empower, rebuild, and reconnect Pennsylvania's fiber economy, not by solving the puzzle or solving every part of the puzzle, but just serving as a catalyst that elevates and connects and empowers the key players across the ecosystem. So really, again, like I said, we're the connectors. We are always, saying, hey, meet this person, and bringing people together in a room and just making sure that everybody knows each other and can do this work together and share their grievances and also their wins and everything that's happening. So specifically, what we do is we connect and empower. So again, facilitating collaborations throughout the supply chain. We spread awareness and understanding through things like this. So educating the public, businesses. We do things like congressional briefings to educate policymakers. And just to create this more sustainable economy in Pennsylvania. We also do education and training. So we partner with schools and universities, and we're building out a workforce development program to really cultivate the next generation of thought leaders and professionals.
So why do we do all this? So fast fashion is a real problem in our industry right now. We'll talk more about what that means. But natural fiber, slow fashion, and mindful consumption are the solution. And that's what we really believe, which is why we're working towards building that out. So what is fast fashion? So fast fashion is just like it sounds. It's clothing that prioritizes quick production of trendy, affordable garments. It often sacrifices the environment. It sacrifices ethical labor. And the idea behind fast fashion is that they're producing and producing and producing so that people can stay on trend. It used to be that brands would put out 2 collections a year. And I think now we're up to sometimes 15, 20, 30 collections a year, or even more, really having new products every day, all day. And so this is horrible for many reasons. But that's what I want you to think about when we think of fast fashions. It's big brands that are producing large quantities of product. So here are some examples of fast fashion brands. Some of you may know that they're fast fashion brands, and some you may not. Sometimes it can be a little bit hard to decipher, and we'll talk about some tools at the end of our presentation that you can use to make better choices. But with fast fashion, the idea is that it's promoting this like Instagrammable or social media person that, wants to wear something new all the time instead of the idea of like our clothes matter. They come from somewhere. We need to take care of them and we need to make sure that they last for a long time. So right now, our model in the fashion industry is a take, make, waste model. We buy something, it's cheap, we wear it a couple times, and we have no connection to it, so we can throw it out, and it ends up in landfill. We also have a huge amount of clothing that is made from polyester, which is a plastic, and it comes from our oil. So something to think about. All of our synthetic fabric produces something called microplastics, which I'll get into in a second. So some other issues that fast fashion has, and many fashion industry issues we're going to talk about. So one is PFAS and finishes. So you might have heard about PFAS in your Teflon pans, how they've figured out, right, that these are forever chemicals that are staying in our bodies, that they're not safe for us to consume. But we're also finding them in our clothing. When clothing is finished, meaning it's gone through the production process, it's made, we can apply different finishes for things like flame resistance or fabric softener or wrinkle resistance, water resistance, all kinds of different finishes. And a lot of these can include harmful things that harm your health. So I always like to tell my students that formaldehyde is in a lot of these finishes. That's something that people often remember the horrible smell of from science class in high school. So that's what you're wearing every day. And your skin is your biggest organ, and you're absorbing these harmful chemicals into your skin. Microplastics are another issue. So every time we wash a synthetic garment, it releases thousands of microplastics into our waterways, into our soil. We're now finding microplastics in all humans, and we're even finding them in our plants, which means that it's going through our soil, through our waterways, and coming into our plants. So every time you're washing something that's made out of synthetic fabric, we're contributing to this problem. And it's one that feels at this point impossible to manage. So textile dyeing is also a huge polluter. It's the second largest source of pollution in our global waterways. Here are some examples of what dyes can do to our rivers. And there's kind of like a industry joke. That's not really the right word because it's not at all funny, but that you can always tell what the next season's most popular color is based on the rivers in India. And that's not something that we want to see. There's people that are literally working in these waters, bathing in these waters, eating from these waterways, and this is what they're putting into their bodies. So here are just some news article headlines about dyes. We're definitely becoming more and more aware of what fashion is doing to our environment globally. And it's in the news, but it still is not really changing much, unfortunately. And one of the things we work on is policy. Leslie will talk about later, but we really do believe there needs to be some kind of intervention from a policy standpoint before we're really going to be able to see a lot of change here. The fashion industry also does affect our soil health. As I mentioned, with microplastics is one way. We can have contaminations from dyes and pesticides used on crops. Remember, our fabric either comes from a farm or from a lab. So all the stuff that comes from a farm, we need to be mindful of these things. Cotton specifically is highly water intensive. Wool is pretty water intensive as well. So we want to be mindful of water scarcity, and as we mentioned before, synthetic fiber shedding and releasing microplastics. We also have a lot of human rights issues in the fashion industry, and this is one that I find most people are not aware of, especially when it's not happening here in front of our faces and we're not seeing this every day. I always like to say, if you are a person that cares about women's rights, you are a person that should care about the fashion industry and ethical labor, because most of the workers that are working and sewing our garments are women, and they are treated completely unfairly in many parts of the world. 93% of garment workers are not paid a living wage, and most are subjected to unsafe working conditions. There's modern day slavery happening, there's child labor happening, there's extremely low wages, poor health and safety protocols, you name it, it's happening in the fashion industry. And because our supply chain has gotten so huge and so global, it's almost impossible for brands to track all of these moving pieces in their supply chain. And so sometimes the brand doesn't even know that this is happening, because a factory could subcontract to another factory and you cannot even know it as the brand. So Remake is a great organization that we partner with. They really focus on ethical labor in the fashion industry. They do this whole pay up campaign, and they have gotten brands to shift and pay wages. Especially during COVID, we saw a lot of brands just canceling orders after they already had agreed to pay for them. And so then the workers didn't get paid. And so we see that it still does happen. This is the Rana Plaza collapse, which was several years ago. I'm forgetting what year it was, I think 2015. But this is a factory in India. It's a fast fashion factory. There were several different brands that we found tags for in this factory when it collapsed. But they knew that this factory was unsafe and nobody did anything to fix it. And the workers had to continue to work in this environment every day. And over 1,000 people died just because they went to work that day. We also have a huge problem with waste and overproduction. This is a big reason why I got into this world. Most of the garments that we think we're donating even still end up in landfill, about 80%. We have garments that are unsold because there's just so much production by brand. There's too much that people can even buy. So we have a lot of unsold inventory. It's often incinerated. Their returns often end up being part of this waste stream. So that's a fact a lot of people don't know, that when you send something back as a return, it's actually cheaper for the brand to just throw it away than it is to put it back into their system. So again, just like being a mindful consumer is really important. We have also a global market. So just as I talked about a global supply chain for the fashion industry, and your garments go all over, well, then after you've worn them and then you donate it, then they still go back into this giant global supply chain, and then wreak havoc on environment and people and other places along the world. So this is an example. This is a picture I took at Goodwill. So this is all the items from Goodwill that were not sold and then are bailed, and then they don't actually know where they go. So I'm not going to speak on behalf of them, but most likely they go to this global market. And this, if you could just picture, I'm 5'4" and my head went up to maybe the bottom of this first pile here. So this is huge. The scale of this is really enormous. And this was just like this is just like a regular day there, and it happens all the time because we just have too much.
Okay. Is it working? Here we go.
There we go. So between 10 and 40% of garments produced are not sold. We have this throwaway culture, and we also have enough clothing on the planet to clothe the next 6 generations of the human race. I love this stat, because if we could just literally stop making clothing today, right now, we could turn off the faucet. And until we do that, we're really not going to have change. If we keep overproducing, we're not going to be able to solve any of these problems. We could work on textile recycling. We can work on all of these solutions. But until we can stop the stream of synthetic fast fashion that's coming down our pipeline, we're really not going to be able to make much impact. This is another photo. This is in Ghana. And this is, people live here. I think it's important to note that when I say landfill in other countries, it's not like what we think in the US as a landfill that's just like, now it's a park and there's grass on top of it and we don't see it. Clothing is ending up in public places, on beaches, like in people's backyards. This is what they're having to live next to every day.
I'm just going to chime in here. I was recently at a conference, and the OR Foundation is a foundation that works specifically in Ghana in the Kantamanto market where all of our waste goes. It's the biggest secondhand market in the world. And this is their reality. They call them tentacles. So all these clothes are basically like tied together, not on purpose, but because they like get tumbled in waves. They're hundreds of pounds and they are so deep in the sand that it's almost impossible to shovel it out. Um, it kills wildlife, it strangles dogs, it's killed people. It's insane. They could be longer than a football field. They brought one that to this conference. It was like, I don't even know, maybe 6 feet long. And they had to have, I think it was like 6 or 8 people carry it. And it was just, it's insane. The amount of waste that uh, affects, it's our waste and it's affecting other people's lives. So what is really needed are these policies that what we would like to see, and I'll talk about it later, but policies that make it the responsibility of the producers or the brands to figure out what to do with this waste, right? If they're putting it into the world, they need to figure out how to take it out of this world and keep it in our country. Because if it were in our country, think about how much different we would consume. If this were our streets or our beaches, like we're sending it away so that we don't have to see it, but we can just look in our closets to see it. We know how much we consume every day and go to the stores. Like it's all there. It doesn't need to be sent away for us to see the reality of what's happening. All right, okay.
And so in 2022, 9.5 billion pounds of clothing returns ended up in landfill. So as I mentioned before, returns are a big, big part of this problem as well. So gone are the days when you can order 5 sizes, try it on in your own home, and then send the rest back.
If you can, go to the store first, figure out which size is yours, and then order it. All right.
And the fashion industry contributes to about 10% of global greenhouse gas emission. And it has a really big effect on our environment, which I'm sure this group knows very well. So CO2 emissions are a big part of our supply chain. As Leslie mentioned earlier, we are a global supply chain. So from conception to production, every part of our supply chain, and then after, we're shipping things all over the world. And so we're producing a lot of emissions. There's a lot of energy consumption, water chemicals are released and microplastics into our waterways. We even think about events that happen in the fashion industry, like fashion weeks, and what is sometimes made just for these events that is then thrown out afterwards. We have to consider all these things when we're thinking about our impact as an industry.
And people from all over the world flying to the events and then flying. Work in harmony with nature and prioritize circular economy principles and support local economies and communities. We aim to create a thriving, interconnected network of individuals and businesses committed to ethical and sustainable fashion practices. This is our community, not all of them, but this is just an example of some of the people and types of people that are in our community. So we have everyone from farmers, processors and manufacturers, retailers, researchers, students, educators, universities, policymakers, advocates, hobbyists, like everyone along that has not, I was going to say the supply chain, but it's beyond the supply chain. It's even just us as consumers, people that just want to learn more about how they can be better at or be more mindful consumers, really tap into this network. So, what are fibers? We just talked a lot about it, but we didn't really describe what they are. So, textile fibers, they can be a natural or synthetic fiber, and they're structures that can be spun into yarn and woven or knitted in or bonded into fabric. So, a natural fiber is something that comes from plants or animals, and it's things that ones that you would know: wool, alpaca, cotton, flax, which is linen, hemp, silk, and things of that nature. Synthetic fibers are man-made and they're from a lab through chemical processes, and that's nylon, polyester, acrylic, spandex, rayon, and things of that nature. So, like I just said, synthetics include spandex, lycra. Well, I didn't just say those, but I'm saying them now. Nylon, polyester. And they are dependent on fossil fuels. And this is horrible for our environment, as you know. And they contribute to pollution by releasing microplastics into our waterways. They harm our health by releasing toxic chemicals during production and wear, as Rachel mentioned before. And production processes strain the planet by increasing carbon emissions and depleting natural resources. That's, like we said before, transportation or the amount of toxic chemicals and water and other things. And do well in Pennsylvania. Wool is an amazing fiber. As most of us think of it, it's warm. I think that I know there's a misconception that is itchy. It is not itchy. You just or you're just wearing the wrong wool. There's a lot of really soft wool, and a lot of it is in Pennsylvania. There are so many, we call them producers. There's so many wool producers in Pennsylvania. There's no market for their wool. All of our wool is coming from China or overseas, and it has left our wool industry completely depleted. And most farmers have a barn full of wool in on their farm with nothing, with nowhere to go. So if you want to support your local farmers, that's a great way to do it. Buy from them, buy some wool from them. You can use it for bedding, you can use it for insulation. It's it absorbs sweat and gets rid of sweat smells, UV protection, long lasting. It's really flexible, so you can it's the fibers can bend up to 20,000 times without breaking. It's elastic. They're making some, Rachel, am I correct? They're making like workout clothes from it now.
Mm-hmm.
It can absorb up to 30% of its weight in water without feeling wet. It's hypoallergenic. Dust mites don't like wool, so it's great for people with allergies. It retains heat. It promotes natural perspiration. Anti-static. It's biodegradable. It's breathable. Um, and it's great. I already said insulation, but it is great and it's durable and flame
Right.
resistant.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that if you like to knit or crochet or anything like that, there is a list of local places to buy wool from these farmers, to buy yarn, on our website.
So flax. Flax is what it, is made from, or we make linen from. And flax has a great history in Pennsylvania. It first came to the U.S. And it came to the U.S. to Germantown. We used to have hundreds of processing facilities. Now there are no processing facilities in the United States at scale. So we're working to bring that back to Pennsylvania. But flax is an amazing fiber. It's strong. If you think about when you iron your clothes, the highest setting is linen, right? So it can withstand a lot of heat, can absorb up to 20 times its weight in moisture before feeling wet. It's 20% stronger when wet, so it's great if you want to use it for rope or boating, things like that. It's durable. It requires very minimal to no pesticides or water, moisture wicking, UV resistant. It's lightweight. It can both retain body heat and keep you cool. Hypoallergenic. It requires much less land than cotton to grow, and so many more things. Hemp is like flax on steroids. It is an amazing plant. Unfortunately, there's a
More red tape with growing hemp.
we're what?
I said more red tape with growing hemp.
Yeah, because people think about it as marijuana. It's not. There's a lot of education that needs to go into this, but it's like a cousin, but it's not, it doesn't have the psychoactive components to it. Um, it also grows differently. It's a different variety. It's a different seed variety, so it's not the same, basically. But there's so much education that needs to go into that for it to be something that we can grow more um, readily and take those restrictions away. There's also a lot of times farmers run into the issue with when they grow the crop, people come and steal their crop because they think it's marijuana. So it's like this whole thing that we just need to destigmatize and educate so that people know that no, like this is an actual great, it's an amazing crop. It's they use hemp for rope for the Navy. It's even it's I don't know how much stronger. I want to say 10 times stronger, but I don't know. I'm making that up. I just know it's much stronger than flax. And it's a very fast crop. It's a turnover of 120 days. So that means you can get more than one harvest in a year, which is great for producers and has a lot of different uses. It can be, and all of these actually do, but biocomposites and things of that nature. So this is all of the steps that it takes to produce our natural fibers. So it comes from a farm first. You either grow it in the ground or on an animal. If it's on an animal, you have to shear the animal to take the wool off. Um, you grate it and you scour it, which is the washing of it, and combing and carding. And then it goes to dyeing, spinning, weaving, cut and sew, and then to the product. And then after the product, then it's shredded and composted, hopefully. Or it's, mended and it stays in your closet forever and ever. Or it grows from the ground, it's harvested, redded, breaking. This is just all the processing. Um, And then same thing, it goes to spinning, weaving, dyeing, cut and sew, product, shred, compost. Currently in Pennsylvania, we do not have all of the pieces that we need to create a complete garment. We are working on this. We do not have cotton. This is just all of the natural fibers. We don't have cotton in Pennsylvania. It doesn't grow great here. It's not our climate, but it can grow here, just not at the scale that it does in the South. We're okay with that. It's very, environmentally and labor or land intensive. Not great for our waterways. And so anyway, we have everything for wool, but we do not have a lot of mills. So right now, a wait time is 6 months to 2 years to get wool processed. So if a farmer would like to go and they have, like I said, this big barn of wool, they're going to have to wait. Not only that, they're going to have to pay for it to get there. They're going to have to pay for it to be processed. And then at the end of it, they might not even have a market for it. So we're also trying to build that market by doing this education stuff and creating more awareness that this exists and that we should all support our local communities. When it comes to hemp and flax, we do not have the processing. So that is also something we're working on. We are currently, or we were on a USDA grant, an organic market development grant that would support processing flax fiber in Pennsylvania. And that was 12,000 acres of flax fiber. And for domestic manufacturing, unfortunately, that grant is frozen through the USDA at the moment, and we do not know if we will be getting that back. So we are just on hold for now. So what is circular fashion? Circular fashion goes by the three principles: design out waste and pollution, keep products and materials in use, and regenerate natural systems. So not just designing for the sake of design and like getting a shirt, but also considering what happens to it when we no longer want it. What can it be upcycled? Can it be reused? How can we design for end of life instead of design for this single product? And circular fashion, it focuses on waste reduction and circular economy principles. Sustainable fashion has an environmental focus, and it uses textiles that are manufactured, constructed, and marketed in a responsible and conscious way. I think of sustainable fashion as a way to sustain our environment and our economy and things of that nature. Sustainability is kind of a term that we don't love to use because people use it so often that it kind of lost its meaning. Like, what is sustainable? What does that even mean anymore? Because so everyone's like, it's sustainable, and we really need to watch out for greenwashing as well. But when we are saying that in this context, you can say it's more of the environmental focus. And ethical fashion focuses more on people and animal welfare. So fair labor practices, sustainable sourcing of materials, humane treatment of animals, reducing environmental impact. And that's throughout the life cycle of the garment. Slow fashion is what we also really focus on, which is prioritizing quality and sustainability over quantity and speed. So it's basically the exact opposite of fast fashion, which Rachel was talking about before. And it encourages consumers to buy fewer, better made clothes that last longer and encourages them to take care of those clothes.
So what can you do? We always like to end on a positive note and talk about what you can do as an individual. So lots of things you can do when we're talking about just you buying clothes and getting rid of clothes. So anytime you want to donate something, instead of just throwing it in a bin, we really encourage you to rehome it, which means that you find a friend, a family member, you call up a local shelter and see what it is that they're looking for, what they need. Do you have what they need? That you're really actually making sure it goes into the hands of somebody else instead of into this whole larger global supply chain.
Also, a clothing swap is a great way to get rid of your clothes, and it's so fun to see. You might hate your clothes, but somebody else is going to love them.
Yes. You can buy secondhand. You can pay attention to what you really need. There's a trick you can do where you flip around all the hangers in your closet. So if your hangers all face this way, you can turn them all this way, and then you can see what you actually wear at the end of a season. And then do a clothing swap and get rid of what you don't. I also like to make myself rental boxes. So some of you might be familiar with renting clothes. It's arguably sustainable or not sustainable. We're not even going to go there right now. But you can make them with your own clothes so that you put like, you pull out a couple t-shirts, a couple pairs of pants, a couple sweaters, and then that's all you put in your closet for that week. And you have to style it based on what you have. And it forces you to really wear what's in your own closet in a completely new way. If you are buying new, make sure that you're buying quality and not quantity. If you have $100, buy one good thing that's $100, not 10 things for $10 that were made horribly. And buy from either made to order brands. Made to order brands are great because they're not over consuming. They're making that item specifically for you when you order it. Or other sustainable brands, look for natural fibers we talked about, and you can call and email your representatives. And we have many other acts, actually, some updates in a following slide that we're going to talk about. You can also support your local Fibershed. It's important to support your local Fibershed because it helps to create jobs, restores, in our case, Pennsylvania's once booming textile industry. It keeps dollars circulating within your own community. It supports community building and resilience. I really believe in this idea that if you know who made your clothes, and it's your neighbor and you know that they worked at the factory and they sewed it and they made it and their love went into that you can feel more connected to your clothing, you can feel more connected to your community. And textiles are just a great way to build community. It's something that's so hands-on and that's so creative, and there's so many different ways you can build community around textiles. You're utilizing local resources, climate positive practices, less waste. You're supporting your local farmer instead of big business, and you're supporting innovation and craftsmanship as well as promoting natural fibers. You can avoid toxic chemicals. So again, look for those natural fibers. Avoid fabrics with finishes. So this one can be a little bit tricky. So avoid anything that says like crease resistant, antimicrobial, or anti-static. Because those typically have finishes on them. There are some fibers that are naturally antimicrobial and antibacterial, which are fantastic. But if it's not made out of a natural fiber and it has this label, then we know it's with the finish. Choose fabrics that are naturally resistant to wrinkling, like wool and cashmere and lyocell. Always wash your clothing before you wear it. Most of this stuff still doesn't come out of your clothing, even when you wash it, but it at least helps a little bit. Look for certifications. So there's GOTS certification. There's several other certifications that you can look for, and they all mean different things. And you can choose clothing brands that use non-toxic dyes and finishes as well. We love to use natural dyes and work with natural dyes. You can make dyes out of onion skins in your kitchen and avocado pits and blueberries and turmeric and all kinds of things that don't have harmful effects. And I think it's really important to identify what you care about. So people ask me every day, you're always talking about all this sustainability stuff and all this fashion stuff, and how do I know what to buy when I need to buy something new? And I always say that it's really important for you as an individual to identify the things that you really care about most, because we cannot make a fully sustainable garment. It just doesn't exist. So, what is most important to you? Is it water? Is it microplastics? Is it ethical labor? Is it reducing packaging or carbon footprint? Or is it waste at end of life? For you, what are those things that really strike a chord with your individual values? And then how can you support the brands that align with those values?
So another way that you can support ethical, sustainable, circular fashion is to call your representatives and advocate for these policies. The Fabric Act is a great um, bill that is advocating for fair wages in the United States. We think, okay, fast fashion, it's overseas. They're still manufacturing clothing in the United States. These workers are making $3 an hour or less. There is a loophole in the system where they are paid by the seam or the garment, and that means that they can work an 18-hour day and not come close to minimum wage. So the Fabric Act would support at minimum wage, which is crazy to think that it's basically modern day slave labor in the United States. And that we even have to like put legislation around this. It's just so anyway, that's one of them. That's an important one. The Americas Act is for domestic manufacturing. A new one that just came out about 2 weeks ago, Protect Our Clothes from PFAS Act, that is supporting, Rachel had talked about PFAS, those forever chemicals, making sure that there's legislation around what happens to those chemicals, what they can be used in, specifically for outdoor clothing, so our raincoats and things like that. The California Fashion Environmental Accountability Act is also a new one where they are making sure, wait, that's the old one. Sorry. They go by SB, so I'm not used to the actual name here. I think that this one is oh yes, okay. So this one is the one that the Fabric Act was made from. So the original legislation is in California. It was passed in 2023, I believe, and that in California, every garment worker has to make minimum wage. So that was already passed. Now it's on the federal level, and that's the Fabric Act. The California Responsible Textile Recovery Act, that's a new one, and that's what I was talking about before, where the brands have to be responsible for the waste that they create. So there's some things that are, they have to work with the brands to make sure, there's lobbyists and all these things. They're still working on that legislation, but California is way ahead of us. And we'd love to see something like that in Pennsylvania and on a federal level. The Slow Fashion Caucus was just launched over the summer, I think June, I believe. We had a part in advising on that agenda and are still talking with them about the agenda as it changes this year, especially now with the new administration. But a caucus, if you don't know, a caucus is basically just an interest group. They don't create legislation, but they educate legislators so that legislation can happen in these areas. And something to look at is the EU strategy for sustainable and circular textiles. The EU is light years ahead of us. They have come out with many different bills that require brands to identify every part of their supply chain, how to care for your garment, how to mend your garment, the exact impact that it had on the environment, on animals, where everything came from, who it came from. So right now on your clothing tag, it might say like made in China, but we don't know what part of your clothes were made in China. Was it the fiber that was grown in China? Was it just dyed in China? Did they only just sew the tag on in China? Like there's literally no legislation around that. And so there's no way for us to know where our clothes actually come from. Okay, tools for you. Rachel, you want to take this one?
Taking it away. So, an app that I like to recommend, and I actually saw someone asked about this in the chat, is called Good on You. Again, this can be really overwhelming. So we always want to say, like, buy secondhand first. Don't really buy anything new. But if you need to buy something new, it can be really overwhelming to even know what to look for in a sustainable brand. I think Leslie mentioned greenwashing. So if you're not familiar with that term, that's when brands are marketing that they're sustainable to you, but they're actually not. And so there's a lot of confusion that happens. So Good on You is a great way to at least get some kind of ranking system for different brands to help you make those decisions. We have a ton of resources on our website at pafibershed.org. We also work with some of these collaborator organizations. Remake is a great one I talked about that really focuses on ethical labor in the industry. Fab Scrap collects pre-consumer waste and in the industry, so fabric and tags and trimming before it even was turned into clothing. We didn't even really talk about that whole waste stream that exists. And then Fashion for Good is another great resource. And so how to get involved and support our work. We are forever fundraising as a nonprofit, so you can always make a donation at pafibershed.org/donate. You can volunteer with us. We always need volunteers to help with different tabling events or other types of events that we do with research, with other things. We have volunteers do all kinds of stuff. You can collaborate with us on programming and events, can become a member. Share what you learned today with at least one person is a great, easy way to make a difference. Spread the word, and you can follow us on social media at PA Fibershed. And Leslie, go ahead.
So we also have a membership. Rachel had just mentioned it. We have a membership for students, individuals, business and nonprofits. They are very affordable. And this connects you with people. And we have a membership hub where you get information such as policy updates, articles, and item or podcasts, episodes to watch, things like that. Different industry events or events around the state that are happening in fiber or fashion or sustainability. And just like an amazing network of people who are really just passionate about this work and want to connect with others and make a difference. And this is how you can connect with us if you want to reach out. We're always here to chat, and you can follow us on LinkedIn or just check out our website. And thank you so much for listening. We appreciate your time.
Well, thank you both. That was quite a world opened up there. We're looking forward to Chuck and Joe with the questions. Oh, and also before we got started, I wanted to thank Adrian for suggesting you folks for this. She advocating to have you speak tonight. So we're pleased she got us connected. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll take the Chuck, I'll take the first question, or actually two questions. Do you have a way for Pennsylvania companies to brand their products so consumers know about their production? And then the second question is, do you have a directory of consumer-facing Pennsylvania-based clothing or fabric?
So these are both things that we're actually actively working on right now. As of right now, we do have a list of our members that are on the website. So you can, all of our members are for the most part aligned with our values. But we will be creating a specific list for them that they can use the logo on their product for just this reason. And we do have a map on our website, but it's mostly focused on industry. But we are working on a directory of PA-based brands right now, and that's we have a volunteer working on that, actually helping us with that research right now.
Great. Chuck, do you want to take the next one, or are you? And if not, I'll ask. And I think you referenced this already with respect to the Good on You app, and it's, do you have an opinion on retail apps for consumers to find sustainable options like the Good on You app?
Yeah, I think it's necessary. It's, even as a seasoned professional, you can sometimes see things and think that it's a sustainable brand and it's not. And stuff is changing so frequently too. I always joke that 5 years ago in my classroom, we were talking about how exciting it was that we were making fabric out of plastic water bottles. And we now know, right, that we should not be doing that. And that is not sustainable in any way. But at the time, it was like, oh, this is new and exciting, and this is a new innovation. And we've learned as an industry that we always now have to constantly ask, like, okay, well, what's the downfall of this thing that we're possibly creating? And so yes. So I think it is great to use these types of apps and resources, just because things are changing so frequently. It can be so overwhelming, and it is so hard to decipher what is actually a good brand to support. And that's why local is great too. Like, can you know the person? Can you walk into a store and know where that item came from, and, trust that person?
I also
Okay. How about
that they mentioned that we breathe microplastic and nanoplastic dust in our home. That is totally true. Every time we're wearing a synthetic garment, we're shedding microplastics. So it's not just in the washing, it's in every time we move. And when we sit, and when it's coming off on our chairs and things like that. So yes.
And you have lots of textiles in your home too, your curtains, your chairs, your couch, all of that stuff. You can choose natural fibers for as well.
where can we find Pennsylvania manufactured sources of fabric offered to the public to sew into new garments, such as organic cotton or linen, or sources from PA farms that raise and produce fiber for hand knitting yarns? Are there retail outlets for sustainable PA manufactured clothing?
That would be nice.
So like I mentioned, we do have the map on our website. So that's where you can find sources of fabric. I don't know, I'm a little bit confused on this question of offered to the public to sew into garments. Or oh, I see what you're saying. Sorry, I missed. So like for general public to just buy fabric.
Yep.
So there are some resources on our map for that. And there's also sources there for hand knitting yarns. We have a whole resource list of yarns on our website specifically for that. And there are not any current stores that are only selling PA manufactured clothing that I know about, but that would be fantastic if there were.
We're currently updating our map, so just check back in, a few weeks or every so often to see, because we are going to be adding a lot more of these things onto our new map.
Okay, Joe.
And just a comment, you two are the local version of the documentary By Now. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have you connected to the PA Association of Sustainable Agriculture? If so, do they have much of a networking, marketing, and fiber anymore?
Networking, market, and fiber anymore. So they do work in fiber. They have a lot of producers in their network. I don't know about them marketing fiber. Rachel, do you know about? I know that.
So I think what's important to understand is that right now we don't have necessarily an end market for a lot of the fiber that we're growing locally. So we're kind of stuck in this holding pattern for a little bit while we need to build up the industry again and build up this supply chain. we also still need to have farmers testing and growing. So like Pennsylvania Flax Project, for example, they're really working on growing flax and like testing the seed varieties. And they got a grant so that they can guarantee farmers get paid for their flax. But they're going to have to then send that out to China to be processed because we don't have it here. So there's
That's a huge carbon footprint.
Yeah, yes. So there's a lot of bumps on the road, and we don't want to encourage farmers to be growing this stuff if there's not going to be an end market for it. So even with wool, we're going to be doing an event in the fall with Sheep and Wool Growers Association with one of our fiber mills, which I'm super excited about. We're going to be it's going to be focused a lot on education of how do we get the producers to understand what state their fiber needs to be in before they can send it to a mill. And then how do we like kind of ease out this mill process so there's not so much of a backlog? And then how do they sell that product that they then get at the end, right? There's a lot of missing pieces to this puzzle. So it's not as easy.
Where is the event?
Like, grow this thing. That's going to be in Collegeville, PA.
That's not very far.
Yeah, we can absolutely share it with you. I think it's September 16th is where we landed on.
Yeah.
Something around there. It's not even up on our website yet or anything, but we can send an update on that for sure.
That would be great. The next question, Joe, you can ask your own question.
Yeah, my own three questions. I wasn't familiar with the term retted, but I did Google it while you were talking. But thanks, Karen, for putting a note on there to define it. Anyway, I wasn't familiar with that term, but can you explain that process for example, flax? How long does that process take?
Yeah. So retting is basically like when you have to, so for flax, you have to pull the fiber out of the ground. You can't just cut it because you want the longest possible fiber. And then you bundle it up and you leave it in the field for, I think it's like a few weeks. Rachel, you might know
Yeah,
this
so
better.
there's field retting and then there's like retting in like a tub, basically, where you soak it in water, which is I think what Karen's more referring to. In Pennsylvania, they're typically field retting right now is what they're looking at. And there's actually, if you go back to Europe and like how this process was originally made, there are still these people, they're called flaxmen, and they literally will go around to all of the fields where the flax is being grown and say, like, okay, it's now done being retted. It's now perfect. We can process it. So it does take several weeks, but it's one of those things. It depends on the weather. It depends, right? There's a lot of other factors. So there's a person that really knows what to look for, and they give you the go ahead when you can process it.
Yeah, there's not this specific time. That's why I wasn't sure. Like could be a couple weeks. It could be more than a couple weeks because again, it's based on the weather and also the knowledge of when to end that process. We hear a lot of this because we don't have this industry anymore in Pennsylvania or in the United States. It's a lot of trial and error because we have lost a lot of this generational knowledge, and a lot of times it's overredded. We hear that a lot, that they do this huge research trial and then they overread it, and then it's not in a
The
state.
fiber's not as good as it could be.
Interesting. How do you get, for example, the flax industry to return to Pennsylvania?
Loaded question, but a good one. So Pennsylvania Flax Project is really taking the lead on this, and they're in trials right now. And their goal just over the next several years is just to get to spinnable fiber. So I don't know if you remember that big supply chain graphic that we showed, but just to get to the point that the fiber can be spun into yarn is going to take several years.
But
and then we need somebody else to come in, or maybe they'll end up doing it, I don't know, to come in and bring wet spinning back to the US. So it's machinery, like none of this exists here. So it's requires a huge or actually, I don't even want to say huge investment. It's a few $1 million, I believe, so yes, that's a lot of money, but as far as like scale of industry, not as much. But their whole idea is to create these regional processing facilities so that they can share the harvesting equipment and it can be more of a co-op. But it's several years out and will require a lot of time and a lot of money, as well as a lot of trial from the seed perspective and making sure that we can grow a product that is that works really well for fiber. There's also a lot of challenges right now as far as getting seed. That's a whole other discussion. So it's moving. They're doing a great job. They're working at it. Their grant is one of the ones that's frozen right now under the USDA. So it's definitely gonna, they're moving though. They're still gonna do it, but I think it's gonna slow them down a bit.
We also need to consider, that we are trying to build this market while that is developing. So we need people that are committed to using that fiber and also educating around like, we know it's going to cost more money, but why is it going to cost more money? Why should we invest in things that cost more money when they're produced locally? And we can really identify, where it came from, who it's supporting, that we can have these very transparent systems in place. And that's really what we're paying for is, supporting our communities and our local economy.
Okay. Woolex and Wool End are two of my favorite brands that sell beautiful all-season wool clothing. But is it realistic that we can be cost competitive in producing clothing like this in Pennsylvania?
So I'm not familiar with their price point. I'm going to do a quick Google here. Um, so just off a quick Google, I think it is possible. It's going to take time, right? Because it's all about supply and demand. So if we have wool fiber readily available here, which we do, but not really in the place that we need it to be right now, but if we can get it in that place and we can have mills here that are able to process everything more quickly, it is realistic that we can come close to these types of brands. We're never going to compete with a fast fashion brand. We're never going to make something locally that costs $10. That's just not realistic. But I think as far as being in like the $50 to $150 range is something that's attainable.
Okay, Joe, I missed your last comment about hemp. Do you want to say
Oh,
something
sure.
about hemp?
Sure. Is hemp gaining any traction in the fiber market, or are there still many obstacles as you presented to overcome?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the more difficult fibers because of this stigma around it. Especially in when we're looking at the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill in 2018 passed, we could have hemp, but it's still classified as in the same way that marijuana is. So um, we, I'm talking on the federal level, we're not sure when they're going to vote on the new Farm Bill. It was supposed to be in 2024, and now with the new administration, we just don't know. So, um, yeah, I would wish I could say more. So there's only one extra step. I believe it's for flax. You can process the same, you can process fiber on the same machinery. There's just one extra step for flax. But because hemp is so much hardier, um, some flax people are afraid that it will ruin their machinery. So they don't really
Mhm.
want to like cross-contaminate those, which I understand. If they're gonna spend all this money on this, they don't want to mess it up.
So Nancy is interested in knowing what's hemp clothing feel like to wear if you had it made.
So there's a ton of it in the industry. We just don't have it made locally, but if you Google hemp clothing, it exists. I have a bag right next to me that's made out of hemp. I don't know if you can see it because I'm blurred, but it's a knit bag. You can't really see, sorry. But yeah, it feels soft. It feels a lot like linen. You can do a lot of different things to it. You can blend it. You can do, yeah, it's it's out there. It's actually out there a lot, and we're seeing it a lot in the industry overall.
You'll probably see more hemp cotton blends right now, um, just because that's what they're making. But it is soft and it's nice.
It says Natasha Tonic, a brand, sells it as swimwear.
Hmm, that's cool. I haven't seen that actually.
There.
Yeah.
Check that
That's
out.
interesting. Are there any other questions? I have a YouTube link here for you to look at a 6-minute video on the life cycle of a t-shirt. If you don't believe what these speakers are talking about as far as carbon footprint, I think I use this in my class, but I don't remember it exactly. But I think a t-shirt travels literally around the world twice before it's actually put on a body. So if you're interested, it's a YouTube video and it's 6 minutes long. And I think it just reinforces everything that you heard about the insanity of having distributed clothing made halfway around the world and then brought back to us. So with that, maybe, there's one more. Mike Civi is saying there's another company, I guess, for high quality hemp clothing. It's called Jung Maven.
Young.
Young
It's in
Maven.
he has a
Young
link
Maven.
in the chat.
Young Maven, maybe. Um,
Did you have something to say, Mike? Unmute and speak up. I guess not. Okay. Phil, do you want to wrap up, or are there any other
Yeah,
questions? Anybody want to unmute and ask a question?
Just a fascinating presentation.
yeah, thank you. Yes, is there anyone else that had any questions they'd like to express just on their own microphones or any other comments? Thank you so much, Leslie and Rachel, for joining us tonight. We're really very pleased to present this topic and get your this important education out there. And we'll stay tuned to your website to see where we can find more sustainable clothing. And we certainly want to encourage everyone to keep on the lookout and anything that you can move the needle any way you can to move in the direction of longer lasting, naturally produced textiles.
And follow Rachel's lead, and everybody tell at least one person about
Yeah.
sustainable fiber shed activities.